The history of heavy.
Hello and welcome to the History of Heavy podcast, a show that traces the chronology of heavy music across genres, song by song. I am your co host, Big Daddy Dave Lieberman, and with us is our host, Magic Michael Huntsman, merciful Magic Michael Huntsman. There he is. Um, we're swapping it up tonight, as you can tell. We're doing a little role reversal. Because we look for ways to keep the podcast fresh and interesting for both of our listeners.
Yes, that's right. Episode 27, man. We are fresh off of Black Sabbath, getting back into the regular flow of things, which is very exciting. I am happy to have you drive the ship tonight, Dave, and it's for a special occasion, and that is 27 episodes in, and this is more due to my controlling nature and anal retentiveness due to any more than anything else. But this is the first episode that you hand selected. You were like, "This is a song and a band I want to talk about."
All right. Um, well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's quite an honor sitting in the hot seat. Um, yeah, I'm looking forward to this. This is a song and a band that I stumbled upon um, in one of these Spotify holes that uh, I've been able to explore largely thanks to this podcast. I'm spending more time listening to music because of this podcast. And one of the things that happens is I've decided, oh, I need to fluff up my playlists. Like a lot of my playlists are just old and I just come back to them. And a lot of times I'm listening to music on my motorcycle. That's the time that I have to be alone and surrounded by music. And not all of it is compatible because there's wind noise and motorcycle noise. So it needs to be loud enough to be able to hear over that. And I wear earplugs a lot of times. So that actually helps with the music quality to cut the wind noise. But it does require, I can't listen to symphonic stuff. I can't listen to a lot of things like Pink Floyd, which have a lot of interludes and quiet moments. So going through playlists and following the path that Spotify lays in front of me, I came across this band, and lo and behold, it's from 1970, and we're 7 songs deep into 1970 now. Um, Let me just take a look here. One, two, three, four, five. This is 6 of 7 songs that we'll be exploring in 1970. And this is a song by the band Sir Lord Baltimore. The song is Kingdom Come off of the album Kingdom Come. This is their debut album. But before I go into that, Mike, do you want to set the stage in the cultural corner?
I do. Hopefully, my comments will be preceded by a theme song that I have thrown together to acknowledge that is my cultural corner tonight. But otherwise, you've just heard Dave's theme song introducing me. It is a true honor to be navigating the cultural corner tonight. Thank you for handing the reins. One of the things, the cultural corner has started as and has been a way for us to set the cultural stage for the song we are talking about, or the decade we are talking about, or the year that we are talking about, as it pertains to the music. Why does this song sound like this? Well, it's because of all of these events that were happening in the world. And in sort of recent episodes, and particularly when we do multiple episodes that cover a single year, you mix it up. You'll deep dive into a band, or you'll focus on one specific really significant event. And so 1970, you just mentioned, we've had a lot of songs, have a lot of songs to talk about for this year. And so a lot of different corners you've been able to touch on as it relates to the culture of the year 1970. What I thought I would do tonight is to illustrate what a watershed year 1970 was for heavy music and for the evolution of what would become known as heavy metal, by going through the list of debut albums that were released in 1970, because I
What
was
a great idea.
pretty blown away by this. Many of these bands we have, or we will be talking about in depth on this show, but I think this list does a really good job of expressing the progression of heavy music from the late 60s into the 70s. And interesting to note, maybe or maybe not. So there were 9 debut albums that I would say contextually make sense for us to talk about as it relates to heavy music. 9 debut albums released in 1970. Of those 9, 8 of them are self-titled releases. A very common thing to do is just, name your first record Van Halen or whatever. That was prevalent in the 70s. So I will now go through that list, because I think it's pretty illustrative and interesting. Beginning, of course, on February 13th, 1970, when a little album called Black Sabbath by a band called Black Sabbath, perhaps you've heard of them, was released. 11 days later, Funkadelic's eponymous debut record came out. 3 days after that, Atomic Rooster, who we talked about a couple of episodes ago, was released. March gave us Mountain's debut, also titled Mountain, by the
Ooh.
great Leslie
How did
West.
they evade our list? They're not here.
Yeah, great band. Though not a debut, but it is notable that in May of 1970, 2 of the most important live rock records of all time were released. Those being the Woodstock soundtrack, which you've talked about in depth in the Cultural Corner, and then the Who Live at Leeds. Not to mention that the fact that May 1970 also saw the release of the Beatles' last ever studio album, Let It Be, on May 8th. On June 19th, Uriah Heep, who we also talked about, released their debut record, not self-titled. It is titled Very Heavy, Very Humble, as we discussed on episode 24. Cactus, who we have not talked about on this podcast, but a very good heavy band, their self-titled album was released on July 1st. On August 14th, Hawkwind by the Mighty Hawkwind was released.
Oh, wow.
Yes, sir. In October 1970, when I was 2 years old, the very first UFO album was released, UFO 1, a band that I love dearly, and we will be talking about on this podcast at some point. And then in December, we arrive at the topic of tonight's conversation, that being Kingdom Come by Sir Lord Baltimore.
Man, that is a who's who of
Good list,
heavy.
right?
That's a great list. Off the top of your head, do you notice any bands other than Sabbath that released another album that year?
Yes, because we talked about, who was it
Because
that
I think
we...
Zeppelin did that in 1969.
No, there was another band in 1970. Atomic Rooster released 2 albums in 1970 that we talked about, because Death Walks Beside You comes out that
Oh, right.
1970. So they're self-titled, and that second record both come out in 1970.
Amazing.
Yeah,
So,
that sort of kind of I've been listening to Kyuss, old Kyuss lately, and just that cadence by which those bands of that era would release. I mean, two a year is insane. But even every year, that's unheard of today. You know,
Oh yeah.
nobody releases an album a year, let alone multiple albums in a single year. Usually, there's a 3 or 4 or 5 year gap at this point.
Right.
Between albums.
Well, and this came up in an earlier conversation about this year, which it feels like this is the year that arrives, that heavy arrives. And we have Black Sabbath. We have a quote in a Sir Lord Baltimore uh, article that I'll get to. Um, but we have this explosion of this sound where it feels like as we came up to this moment, there was a lot of exploration, kind of flirting and coming back. Bands like Iron Butterfly, which have a mixture of sounds in their album. They have a very heavy song, and they have a very uh, a very kitschy, almost Austin Powers song on the same album. And now we've arrived in a moment where the albums are really one solid sound, and there's a plethora of this sound exploration. So I love that you brought us that cultural context because that's really important and it connects to the conversations we've been having up to this moment.
Yeah, yes, I think that it's very fitting that the album Black Sabbath came out so early in the year of 1970 because I feel like everything we've talked more or less, but everything we've talked to up until February 13th, 1970 was proto. You know, it was proto metal, it was proto sludge, it was proto punk, it was whatever. Now it's not really proto. This is heavy metal, or this is
Right.
this music. Pretty much all of those bands, or more, or I mean, obviously Funkadelics in there and some other stuff, but Atomic Rooster and Humble Pie and Cactus and Hawkwind, sure, elements of psychedelia.
Mountain.
Yeah, I mean, those are just sort of definitively hard rock, heavy metal bands without so much of the other, that they don't have as much of the blatant blues stuff or as much of the
Right.
blatant folk stuff or the whatever.
Right.
It's kind of they're sort of putting hard lines around the genre that didn't exist as much in the 1960s.
Yeah. Yeah. A great way to start off the chat. Um, let's get into Sir Lord Baltimore, shall we?
Yes, please.
I couldn't find much on the song specifically, so I'm going to talk about the band and album history. Sir Lord Baltimore was from Brooklyn, New York City, formed in 1968 by lead vocalist and drummer John Garner, guitarist Louis Dambra, and bassist Gary Justin. Some have cited the 1971 review of their debut record, Kingdom Come, in Cream magazine as containing the first documented use of the term heavy metal to refer to a style of music. Uh, the magazine All Music described them as arguably America's first bona fide heavy metal band. So there it is, folks. A couple of publications giving them the badge of heavy metal. A rarity in rock and metal music, Sir Lord Baltimore featuring a drumming lead singer. That's kind of interesting. And they're a power trio. Gotta love that. We have big love for power trios. Having first met in high school, Garner, the band creator, Dambra, and Justin started rehearsing together in 1968. Justin has cited Cream's Jack Bruce as an influence on his early career choice. Gary Justin's the bass player. After a relatively short time and recently out of high school, they've just recently been playing together. The new band auditioned for Mike Appel, who was then working as a talent scout. He'd later launch and manage the career of Bruce Springsteen. Appel agreed to mentor them and reportedly gave them the name Sir Lord Baltimore, taken from a character in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. For the group's debut album, Appel served as co producer as well as contributing to arrangements and lyrics, and he's credited on that album as such. That album, Kingdom Come, was recorded at Van Tone Studios Additional tracks, mixing, and overdubbing were done at Electric Lady Studios with legendary engineer Eddie Kramer, better known for his work with Jimi Hendrix. According to Appel, Pink Floyd had the opportunity to hear Sir Lord Baltimore during these sessions and were reportedly impressed. Released on Mercury Records in 1970, Kingdom Come featured very fast paced hard rock with high levels of distortion in the guitar and, in some cases, the bass, and extensive multi tracking to further enhance the guitar sound. Though this style would become popular in later years, it was considerably different from the majority of that era's contemporary rock music. Uh, they've been its use of distorted guitars, bass, and multi-tracking has been compared to Deep Purple, Blue Cheer, Van Halen, Kiss, and the Stooges. The Kingdom Come album is also considered a pioneer in stoner rock. On February 19th to 20th, 1971, Sir Lord Baltimore played consecutive nights at New York's Fillmore East as the opening act on a bill that includes the Jay Giles Band and Black Sabbath as part of the latter's Paranoid tour. Kingdom Come has received acclaim from critics, and its influence on heavy metal is well noted. Marcos Hassan of Tiny Mixtape called it one of those great records where not a second is wasted. Loudwire named it number 68 in their top 70 hard rock and metal albums of the 70s and has called it one of the earliest true hard rock albums. The album ranked on the list 10 essential proto metal albums by Classic Rock magazine. Their career started to fade after 1971's eponymous release, and Mercury dropped them shortly thereafter. The band publicly blamed drugs on its initial downfall, with low record sales and non payment of royalties also being cited. However, the band did start work in the mid 70s on an unreleased third album, originally scheduled for 1976. And music written for that project was eventually used some 30 years after the band's breakup for the album Sir Lord Baltimore 3 Raw. At that point, in 2006, Garner and Dambra reunited to record and self distribute that new album. Bassist Gary Justin hadn't picked up his instrument in years and declined to be part of the project. Garner produced the album, issued on JG Records in July of 2006 and available only via mail order. The majority of the album's bass guitar work was performed by Tony Franklin, with guitarist Anthony Guido and bassist Sam Powell being credited as guest musicians. Although the album's music was originally written for the aborted 1976 release, the lyrics were modified to present a more overt Christian viewpoint. Wasn't able to find anything on the legacy or fate of bassist Gary Justin, but sometime in the late 1970s, Damra became a pastor, ministering to homeless families in LA. He died in 2019. In 2015, Garner died of liver failure at the age of 63, effectively ending the band. So that brings us to Sir Lord Baltimore, Kingdom Come album, and Kingdom Come the song. Michael, what is your relationship with Sir Lord Baltimore?
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and here's how I would frame my relationship with Sir Lord Baltimore and the like. I have a good number of what I would consider genre friends. I have friends that only listen to punk rock and only talk to me about punk rock. I have friends that are into indie and alternative and only talk about that, and jazz friends and whatever. And I most definitively
Black
have
Sabbath friends.
I have Black Sabbath friends. That's a very specific category. Black Sabbath friends. Those are the best friends. And I have hard rock and heavy metal friends. And I have a specific group of 4 or 5 guys that are all a little bit older than me. And my dear friend Bob Nalbandian, chief among them, who we lost a few years ago to leukemia, R.I.P. Bob, the sweetest, most wonderful person you'd ever meet. And he is illustrative of my relationship with Sir Lord Baltimore. And that is, Sir Lord Baltimore are among those bands Other bands that I would categorize with Lord Baltimore would be Budgie, would be Atomic Rooster, would be Tarkus,
Mm,
would be Pentagram, and
mm,
these are the bands that deep hard rock and metal heads, and what I think makes them distinctly hard rock and heavy metal fans is they literally don't listen to anything else. Like definitively don't listen to anything else, which is crazy making to me. But it really is all they listen to. And those bands that I just rattled off, those similarities in sounds, the sound isn't really the point of it. The point of it is those are the bands that these people will constantly reference as band. Oh my God, you haven't heard. They're the people that say you've never seen The Wire. It's the oh my God, you've never heard Sir Lord Baltimore. You have to like, how do you not know this record? Or Pentagram or Atomic Rooster. You know, those bands that are just obscure enough that if you know, you know, but most people don't know, and knowing makes you part of the club kind of thing.
right.
So for most of my life, certainly through the 70s, through the 80s, and through probably all of the 90s, I had never heard of Sir Lord Baltimore. And at some point, those friends began to ask me that question. Oh my God, why haven't you heard of Sir Lord Baltimore? So that had been my relationship with this band. And you know, when I finally got around to hearing them, and probably that would have been probably in the mid 2000s or something. Um, what's not to like?
Yeah.
Kingdom Come is a really great record, and we'll talk about the specifics of the record and of course the song. But it was just sort of I guess in the context of this podcast, I guess my sensibility was if you have Atomic Rooster, you don't necessarily need to talk about Sir Lord Baltimore. And if I could have either Death Walks Behind You or Kingdom Come, I'd probably take the former. Not to diminish Kingdom Come, and again we'll talk about the song, but to me they sort of scratch that same itch. They're sort of that obscure, you know, hard rock metal band that most people haven't heard of, that were actually great and put out some great records and disappeared into obscurity. So that has been my relationship. Not a band that I ever go back to. But when you mention them, it's like, yeah, let's talk about Sir Lord Baltimore. There's nothing for me not to like, but not
Right.
anything that I ever had on any kind of regular rotation or didn't deep dive. In fact, I didn't even know they were from New York until you just said it.
Uh,
So you know, no deep relationship
right.
whatsoever, but there's no denying that they wrote some great music.
I am so glad to hear your background with that because I found this band 2 months ago in a Spotify deep dive hole and had the reaction that your friends were looking for. Holy shit! Who is this band? Where have they been? Oh my! This is 1970.
Yeah.
What? Like, uh, blew my mind. It was. I can hear some Robert Plant a little bit
Hmm.
influence. I can hear some MC5. I can hear some of those things, but they have such a raw energy that they don't borrow from those things. They grab them, they rip them away, and like shake them. Uh, and it just really was an assault. Uh, the riff on Kingdom Come I think is great, and that's why I chose that one. But there are three other songs on this album that could have equally substituted for this conversation. Very heavy. The album opens really heavy, and it stays high energy. There's one song that's kind of mellow, but the rest of the album is very high energy and explores some bluesy places without getting into being a blues band. Uh, really raw. It keeps this raw frenetic. There's an urgency, it feels like, to this album, and that's probably due to the fact that they're a trio, which I think happens a lot with power trios, is you get the urgency through because it's just these three guys playing. But boy, did it come through, and it I was just gobsmacked. I was really affected by hearing this, and so I've listened to the album several times in the last 2 months. I haven't actually gone into the second album; it just hasn't happened yet. And I like sometimes leaving these things on the table for later. Uh, but my relationship with the band was nil until 2 months ago, and then I've developed a real affection for them. And I've been listening to them, hearing something that is familiar, and I can't place it, and I still can't place it.
I'll tell you what I think it is, at least what it is for me. And to back up just a second, to agree with you that this whole album is good. And I think it does kind of separate them a little bit from some of the other bands. And the Uriah Heep record, I really like that song Gypsy, but I don't really
It's
like
the,
the whole record.
it's
Even the
the other
Iron
way around.
Butterfly, yeah, even the Iron Butterfly record, which obviously has the one of the great all-time titular songs of all time. The rest of the record's like meh. This Kingdom Come, all front to back, is a good record. Like
Yeah.
it's not just this song. It is a good record. The thing, and you touched on it a little bit, but the connection that I never really made until I started listening to the record over and over again to talk about the song with you tonight, that is so obvious to me now that it's clicked, is it's desert rock. Like
Oh yeah.
Kyuss
Yeah.
must have been listening to the shit out of this record. Like these
Yeah.
guys sound like they came from the high desert in Joshua Tree 29 Pond. These guys sound like they
Right.
could be a
Right.
contemporary of
Right.
one of those bands. The guitars are so fuzzy.
Yes.
And the dude can sing, so he's not just like shouting or screaming. Um, and it's not really, I mean, I know I talked at the top about how these were becoming, metal bands, not proto, but these guys have a grunginess, I guess. Like it's more desert than it is Seattle to me, but they have a dirtiness to them that's really appealing. That sort of kicks against what we would become to know as heavy metal. That is a lot more polished and virtuosic. These guys are a little bit more kind of hardened and tough and gritty,
Yeah.
which again I think is kind of that desert scene. It's yes, it's stoner rock, but it's a very specific brand of stoner rock.
Lancaster stoner rock.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that. I do. And I hear that. So it was a real pleasure to me to discover this band, and then in researching, uncover the layers. The drummer's the singer. Oh, that's awesome. There's only three of them making all this noise. That's awesome. So it was really cool. And they're from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I just liked every layer I found about this band. It was really cool. Um,
Let me ask you about the power trio thing for a second.
sure.
So this I've been thinking about this for a few days because I was listening to a Tony Iommi interview, I on the back of the Back to the Beginning show, and he was talking about the way he wrote, and specifically saying how he had to. We have to talk about Black Sabbath, people. How there were only three of them playing the instruments, so he had to fill these spaces and to create as big a noise as possible. You and I have talked both on this podcast and in our personal lives. I've had many conversations with all across my genre friends about the love of power trios, whether it's ZZ Top or Rush or Motorhead or pick your power trio.
The Police.
Name them. I love a power trio. However, to Tony Iommi's point, aren't all of these bands with lead singers and only one guitar player effectively power trios, even if there were a quartet? It wasn't Van Halen a power trio?
Right, right. I think that that's an interesting point to explore. I think in Black Sabbath's case, since we've talked about how Ozzy's vocals tend to follow Tony's guitar and basically the melody of the song, but we do find, areas like, even again focusing on Sabbath, Ronnie James Dio has a he brings vocals as an instrument to a song, and so he adds a player there. And so there are bands where I think they can be a quartet that is a power trio at its heart, but I don't think that it's necessarily just rote.
So, counterpoint, then with somebody that has a voice like Geddy Lee, who also plays keyboards, was Rush then not a power trio? Because I don't. Well, this is a conversation for another day, but I do think it's interesting
Short answer,
to.
no, they're still a power trio.
Okay, all right. While on Black Sabbath, not that we'll ever leave, but in relation to Sir Lord Baltimore, that first Sabbath record comes out on February 13th. Kingdom Come comes out December that same year. So 11 months later.
Yeah.
We you talked and I read about the identification of Sir Lord Baltimore, the first reference of heavy metal. Sabbath had happened a year earlier, give or more or
Sure.
less.
They've already been in the scene for a year before the album comes out.
Right, and I just rattled off all of those records that certainly, whether it's Mountain or Atomic Rooster or Uriah Heep or whatever, that could have been classified as heavy metal. I guess the question as it relates to Sir Lord Baltimore is, do you see how do you hear their sound in relation to what Black Sabbath was doing at, before and leading up to the release of their debut? Is what do you hear the relationship, if any, between those two bands?
I hear the Venn diagram crisscross as heavy metal, but Sabbath has a much more doom
Mm-hmm.
um, twist. They capture that dread in a way that just I find very unique and signature to their sound, is this ominous dread that is not really present in Sir Lord Baltimore. Sir Lord Baltimore has this frenetic energy. They have a hardness. They have a heaviness, but because they're so frenetic, it loses um, the darkness that Sabbath has.
I'm glad you used that word. I'm not sure we've used that word dread to describe any song we've talked about.
Mhm.
And I'm quickly looking through our list. And apart from Sabbath, and maybe this is, of course, the inspiration to Doom. We talked a lot about that on last week's episode. The dread, it's not in the Stooges. It's not in Blue Cheer. It's not in Hendrix or the Velvets or Cream. I think the it's not even in Inagata Devita. There's not dread in that song.
I think you could make an argument that it's in Dazed and Confused, because
Dread?
that there is a little like that.
I think it's depression or
Yeah.
melancholy, but I don't think
Okay.
it's dread.
Less dread. Yep, that's right.
I
It's more
think the
melancholy.
only other song, even Wicked Woman, we talked about Coven and were they an inspiration to Sabbath or whatever. There's not really dread in that song. I think the only other song maybe is Death Walks Behind You, but maybe that word dread is one of those key things that we haven't identified that really set Black Sabbath apart. Again, we talked about the connection between Sabbath and the Stooges and how kind of related they were in environment and whatever. There's not dread. There's anger. There's
Yeah.
frustration. There's a lot of stuff going on emotionally in the Stooges music, but not dread. So maybe that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and as Sabbath is created as the progenitor of doom metal, dread would be synonymous with doom, right? You're
Yeah, that's it.
dreading a doom that is being communicated in sound. So
100%.
interesting to pull that thread. I definitely feel like, to answer your question about heavy metal and how it relates to the not only Sabbath but these other bands that have come out in this year, but right, because Sir Lord Baltimore is bookending it, and we do have another song after this, but it came out before this one did. So I feel like, again, this is a spectrum of plateau or summit that we've reached in music, and we're going to hang out here and explore this altitude for a while before we start climbing again.
Mm-hmm.
We got here through the 50s and 60s pretty uh asynchronously. Ooh, tripping over that one. Asynchronously. But now that we're here, we're really spreading out and feeling it. And so Sabbath is kind of laying a foundation that they're going to build on, and that's going to be able to support a lot more weight. And it includes part of what we've got in some of these other songs, but they really are the only one with that doom dread wing to
Mm-hmm.
them.
I think that's
uh,
right.
Sir Lord Baltimore, this is heavy metal in its base raw form. There is a blues thing that you can there's a seasoning of blues, but this is rock and
Right.
roll,
Right.
and it's played with an intensity, and it's distorted. Some of the distortion reminds me of Cream, very much so. And of course, the bass player Gary Justin refers to that as one of the reasons he wants to be a rock and roll star is because Cream exists, because their bass player exists. So as we as I listened to Sir Lord Baltimore, I just kept hearing this heavy metal, and it really was like equal parts heavy and equal parts garage. They're recently out of high school when this comes out. This sounds like 19 years old sounds. You're just confident enough, but you're naive enough to believe in your confidence. And it works. It just works. It comes together so well.
Yeah, I agree, and I love that they're like the stoner rock of the desert and stoner rock kind of in general. Is it's stripped away of all the flash and bullshit. There's not a lot of guitar histrionics. There's not a lot of vocal kind of affluency. There's not it's stripped down, but it doesn't sound stripped down. It's still heavy and
It's
thick
full.
and dense, and full is a great word for it. But there's again, there's no pretense. It's sort of like it cuts through the fat, which is really, really appealing. And we'll talk about Deep Purple next week, and it's a great song. They have a lot of great songs, but Deep Purple was full of pretense and kind of
Fluff.
show offy
Mhm.
bullshit, which would
Yeah.
ultimately, in my opinion, be the downfall of the genre throughout a lot of the 80s. Although I love a lot of that music, it's a lot of it was just ridiculously stupid because it was so busy with artifice. There's not a lot of artifice in Sir Lord Baltimore.
No, and that's where less is more. It
Yeah.
allows their song to be the song, and it allows their song to be the vehicle for their energy.
You know who
Over and over, I'm
yes,
getting the energy.
another great power trio that I don't think sounds like Sir Lord Baltimore, but feels like has a similar sensibility is the Melvins. You know,
Ooh, ooh,
there is
great,
it
great
feels like the
analogy.
Melvins. I you know I don't I've never heard Buzz talk about Sir Lord Baltimore, but there is that sort of, we are just going to do what we do and we're not going to worry about how you label it, and we're going to take our influences and this is going to be our sound, and it's going to be heavy and it's not going to be overly complicated, and it's like it's going to be boom.
Right.
That's kind of what this record reminds me of.
That is a great connection to make, because and to their credit, the Melvins have created a what 30-year career out of that.
Yeah.
Uh, there's something there, right? There's a there,
Yeah.
and without having the right words, using them as an example proves the presence that is in this album. It's that same thing that the Melvins have proven can stretch an entire career.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, look, if we are using Melvins and Kyuss and Black Sabbath as sort of comparisons to Sir Lord Baltimore, it's good.
Right,
You know,
right,
it's good.
right, right.
Yeah.
Um, anything else you have to say about Sir Lord Baltimore, or this song, or this album?
No, I don't think so. I'm glad you added it to the mix. It obviously fits. I didn't look over it for any good reason, and you kind of forcing my hand to go back and revisit it is appreciated, and it will be in some kind of rotation that it wasn't in before. So I'm happy to kind of revisit this band again.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad I stumbled upon it, and thanks for indulging me. I'm glad that it added an element to our little thing here, our Cosa Nostra. Um, and I'm looking forward to finding some more. I did throw the Janis Joplin recommendation that exists on here after Deep Purple, but I look forward to falling down more holes and maybe adding yet more work to our list.
Yeah, please do. You added a James Brown song. You added an Edgar Winter Group song. So there's
Mhm.
plenty of Dave hosting to come up. But this is a very dynamic, ongoing project that we have no specific end in sight. We'll do it for as long as we have fun doing it. Whether people are listening or not, people do appear to have been listening, which is cool. And if you want to keep up and pay attention to what we are talking about, certainly certainly check out the Spotify playlist, the History of Heavy podcast. That's kind of this, those are the songs. That's the list of the songs we'll be talking about. You send suggestions, hit us up on Instagram at the History of Heavy. And, we're happy to add songs to the mix. Unfortunately, if it's anything prior to 1970, you've missed your chance because this is a chronology. But 1970 so far has been fun. And as of right now, we have one to go.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting to get listener comments to be able to pepper into our conversation, that we're talking about this song and somebody pointed out that this other song by this other band, kind of tickled their interest, and we can pull those threads in. So it'd be neat to get some more interactivity in the conversation as well.
Yeah, 100%. And, while we have been talking about the relative obscurities, Sir Lord Baltimore, Atomic Rooster, Stray, etc., we're about to really get into some thick waters, right? So some popular waters with Deep Purple, Janis Joplin, Pink Floyd, and The Who all coming up in succession. So we've got definitely songs and bands that people have opinions on coming up.
Yeah, and that are very firmly on the map.
Firmly on the map. Yeah, next week's going to be fun. Episode 28, we'll be talking about Deep Purple's Bloodsucker from their In Rock record. I have very mixed opinions about Deep Purple, and I know people are very passionate about this band, including my dear pal, Bob Nalbandian, RIP. But that'll be a fun conversation. I'm very curious. You and I have definitively never talked about Deep Purple,
Right.
which will be interesting.
This will be good. This has been a really enjoyable discussion, and I'm glad that I found this band. And it's fun to have the experience that you describe. Your friends uh, wanting to create. Next time you talk to them, you can let them know that I had this vicariously, and I'm sure it'll make them proud. I'm really excited to put this song on some playlists and to have this album interspersed with some playlists.
It's old new stock, new old stock,
New old stock.
new old
That's
stock.
right.
I
It
love it.
is. This is new old stock. Very good.
I
Very
love
good.
it. That's our next The name of our next episode is New Old Stock. I love it.
Awesome.
All right. Can I do it this week? Can I do it? Can I do it?
You can do it.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.